Absolutely. I am the Executive Director of Special Services here in Lexington 1. And as we got our ATSI, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement school list, we had 12 schools, 7 elementary, 2 middle, and 3 high school. I hope my math is mathing. 12 schools that had made the ATSI list based on the disabled category, based on their students with disabilities population. We figured out that that was 48% of our student population. So 48% of our student population served in those 12 schools were achieving in like the bottom 5% of the state. And that was a problem. And so we needed a district level solution versus a school-based solution, because that's half our kids weren't achieving. And so we needed to look at it from a systems issue versus allowing single schools to try to tackle the issue. What we found, even though we're pretty good at doing MTSS at the elementary level, not as much at the secondary level, even with MTSS, we found that we didn't have a regular systematic data collection process that we used. Yes, we did benchmarks. Yes, we did. There were other small formative assessments, but it wasn't really in a way to inform kids with intensive or extensive needs. So from the time that we decided DBI and working with NCII is the solution we want, we also had to work with all of those schools and school leaders. Those school leaders had to be on board with what we wanted to do in order for it to be successful. And we aren't who teachers turn to when they need something. And we aren't the ones who are there to be able to hold them accountable to a process. So we had to engage. We started at the top with all of the principals. And talk to them about, this is what ATSI means. This is what it's going to take. This is how they love to know the why. Why am I on the list? Why am I on the list? And they were absolutely receptive when they were able to hear the why and see their own data. We provided them a lot of very specific school level data to help them, to help paint a picture of what was going on at their school. In South Carolina, we measure both grade level performance and growth over time. And we started to see some on those benchmarks, especially at a couple of schools that were doing this well. A lot of growth. Kids weren't at grade level, but there was tremendous growth, and they were meeting like the 80th percentile of growth. Growth expectations. iReady has percentage benchmarks that they expect you to meet. And when you are 3 grade levels behind, you have to grow at the 80th growth percentile in order to meet your benchmarks. And we had kids at places we didn't expect performing really well on those benchmarks. And then, of course, the little wins all along the way were the easy CBM. We used that just as the weekly, multiple times a week, so the teachers could get a flavor. And it didn't have to be that. Obviously, you don't use that for behavior, but it was predominantly used with math and ELA. And so they could see those little wins. And we had one of our high schools, also, again, maybe unexpectedly, they chose behavior because they said, and I say behavior, and I don't mean big, throwing chairs, hitting people, biting people. I don't mean that type of behavior. They really identified, because of the data, they felt their biggest issue was student apathy, and students just being disconnected and disengaged. And so they started collecting behavioral data on that and changing up their approaches and their interventions with the kids to get them to do things behaviorally, meaning engaging with the process, with the system, with the classes, with the coming to class, attempting work, staying off your phone, staying awake, that type of stuff. And they saw phenomenal growth over time on behavior part. So not only was it a high school that is typically tough with to implement DBI. But it was also behavior, which can also be tough with DBI. And they did some wonderful, wonderful things. So we had two groups that did really well. It was that particular high school. And then we also had one of our middle schools that was very, very underperforming, that saw some huge academic gap closing. Just the kids growing over time. Again, not on grade level per se, but just the amount of growth they made was phenomenal. And since you asked, we did do a study. We used all 4th to 8th graders. So because it's vertically articulated, you can still measure growth year to year, even if they're not on grade level. And we used all the kids that had a number of probes through EasyCBM, that it was a very clear indication the teacher was monitoring data and using them in DBI. And in that group of kids, we saw statewide assessment growth that had statistical significance. They grew by 15 points more than their non-DBI peers on the math assessment. So that was the other part, is it lent credibility across all levels. Credibility from, I've talked about it with in front of our school board. I've talked about it with our senior leadership. I've talked about it with our principals. They bring credibility, but then they also bring a nationwide perspective, and then resources that are phenomenal that you can't tap into individually as a district. We are very resource rich here in Lexington 1, but they've offered us stuff that even we couldn't have gotten, as far as the minds that you can tap into.